There is a particular kind of filmmaker who treats the audience as an intelligent collaborator rather than a passive customer. Someone who trusts you to hold a fractured timeline in your head, to sit with a question rather than have it answered for you, and to feel authentic awe at practical scale in an age of weightless digital spectacle. This is Movie Blanket Club, and today we are counting down our picks for every single Christopher Nolan feature film. 13 in total across nearly 30 years, from a scrappy no-budget debut shot on stolen weekends to the 70-millimetre epic currently breaking his own box office records in theaters right now. Fair warning, we have placed a film barely 2 weeks old above Oppenheimer itself, and we are fully aware that decision alone is going to start a fight in the comments. Good. Grab your blanket and let's spend some time. Number 13. Following 1998. We begin at the absolute beginning, a black and white micro-budget debut shot on 16mm film across nothing but Saturdays for over a year, because that was the only way its unknown cast and crew could keep their day jobs while making it at all. The plot follows a bored, aimless young writer who begins tailing strangers through London purely for material, only to be recruited by a charismatic burglar into a life of breaking into other people's homes and rifling through their possessions, a decision that spirals into blackmail, deception, and eventually murder. Its cast is entirely unknown, its budget was famously under $6,000, and its 16mm photography is grainy and rough in a way that no later Nolan film would ever look again. What it lacks in Polish, it makes up for with the unmistakable DNA of everything that follows. A fractured, non-chronological structure that forces you to actively assemble the story yourself rather than simply receive it, alongside a fascination with identity, obsession, and unreliable perspective that would define an entire career. Watching it now feels less like a curiosity and more like a thesis statement. Every single formal trick Nolan would later spend $100 million budgets refining is already present here in miniature, shot guerrilla style on real London streets with whatever daylight the crew could scrounge. It remains a favorite among film students precisely because it proves that structure and idea, not money, are what actually make a film feel like a Nolan picture. Nolan himself has spoken about editing the film essentially on a home computer with borrowed software, cutting and recutting the non-linear timeline by hand until the fractured order finally clicked into something legible. A process he has admitted taught him more about structure than any film school could have. The finished film's tangled chronology was reportedly reordered several different ways before settling on the version now widely regarded as the correct read of events, a level of structural tinkering that would become something of a directorial signature. Its cast, entirely made up of friends and colleagues with no prior acting credits, gives the whole enterprise a rough, almost documentary-like texture that no amount of studio polish could later replicate, and the film's eventual festival success, quietly building word of mouth on the circuit, is precisely what put Nolan in a room with the financiers who would fund Memento only 2 years later. Restoration work decades later, sourced from surviving prints scattered across various collectors and archives, allowed a whole new generation of viewers curious about Nolan's later blockbusters to trace his fascinations all the way back to their scrappiest, least glamorous point of origin. Our pick for the most foundational entry on this list, a scrappy calling card, made for less than the price of a decent second-hand car, that already contains every idea its director would spend the next 3 decades perfecting. Number 12. Insomnia, 2002. Nolan's first studio film, and, tellingly, his only remake, sends Al Pacino's exhausted Los Angeles detective to a remote Alaskan town bathed in perpetual midnight sun to investigate a teenage girl's murder, only for a fatal mistake during a foggy stakeout to trap him in an escalating web of guilt and cover-up alongside Robin Williams's quietly unsettling suspect. Adapted from a well-regarded Norwegian original, it swaps that film's snowy darkness for something stranger and more disorienting. An Alaskan summer where the sun simply never sets. Turning sleep deprivation itself into a psychological weapon the film uses on both its detective and its audience. Some longtime fans consider it the most conventional, least distinctly Nolan-esque entry in his filmography. A well-made studio thriller that could plausibly have been directed by several of his contemporaries. What elevates it well past that description is a career-best dramatic turn from Robin Williams, cast sharply against type as a soft-spoken, disturbingly reasonable killer, playing opposite a Pacino performance built almost entirely on the physical toll of not sleeping for days on end. Its relentless, sun-bleached visual disorientation, an unfamiliar landscape where night simply refuses to arrive, does real psychological work beneath its straightforward procedural surface. It proved, at a pivotal early moment in his career, that Nolan could deliver a studio-scale project on time and on budget without losing his authorial fingerprints entirely. It arrived at a notably fragile moment for both of its lead actors, Pacino navigating a run of mixed critical reception, and Williams working to be taken seriously in dramatic territory after decades of broad comedic stardom. And both men clearly used the opportunity to stretch in ways their more familiar roles rarely allowed, trading the broader gestures of their signature work for something quieter and considerably more unsettling. The Alaskan wilderness itself functions almost as a third lead, its unbroken daylight photographed with a bleached, clinical harshness that strips away every shadow a more conventional noir detective might have used to hide. Hilary Swank's local police partner rounds out the triangle with a rookie idealism that makes the detective's compromised ethics land with real weight rather than abstract theorizing. Our pick for the most underrated entry on this list, a disciplined, unglamorous studio thriller carried almost entirely by two performers working well outside their usual comfort zones. Number 11, Tenet, 2020. Released into an emptied-out pandemic marketplace that arguably sabotaged its commercial and critical reception before a single ticket was sold, this globe-spanning spy thriller follows an unnamed protagonist recruited into a shadowy organization fighting a war that moves both forward and backward through time simultaneously, using a mind-bending technique called inversion that lets objects, bullets, and eventually entire armies run in temporal reverse. Its plotting is dense even by Nolan's usual standards, deliberately withholding exposition in favor of pure sensory disorientation. And its now notorious sound mix buries key explanatory dialogue beneath a thunderous John David Washington-scored soundscape that left even sympathetic audiences repeatedly reaching for subtitles. What it achieves regardless is an almost unprecedented commitment to in-camera practical spectacle. A sincere full-sized Boeing 747 was destroyed for a single sequence rather than faked digitally. And its climactic forward and backward pincer battle remains one of the most logistically staggering action sequences ever attempted on film, choreographed so that two entire armies had to rehearse their movements twice over, once forward and once precisely in reverse. Robert Pattinson's magnetic, ambiguous supporting turn as a fellow operative gives the film's coldest stretches real, sly warmth. Its theatrical release, forced by a studio determined to prove cinemas could still function safely, arguably cost the film the box office and critical legacy a normal release window would have afforded it. Elizabeth Debicki's performance as a trapped, abused wife caught between the protagonist and a Russian oligarch villain gives the film's coldest, most cerebral stretches a real human stake worth actually rooting for, and the production's decision to shoot an actual retired jumbo jet crashing into a hangar rather than composite the moment digitally has become one of the most quoted examples of Nolan's practical effects obsession taken to its logical extreme. Reassessments in the years since its rocky release have been considerably kinder than the initial reviews, with several critics revisiting the film specifically to praise a structural ambition they admit they undervalued the first time through, distracted by a marketing campaign that promised clarity the film itself never intended to deliver. Our pick for the most divisive entry on this list, a film so committed to disorientation over explanation that it dared its audience to simply surrender to pure sensation rather than chase full comprehension on a first viewing. Number 10. The Dark Knight Rises, 2012. Closing out the trilogy that redefined what a comic book film could be, this sprawling finale finds a broken, reclusive Bruce Wayne drawn out of retirement 8 years after Harvey Dent's fall, only to face Tom Hardy's masked mercenary Bane, a physically overwhelming ideologue who breaks Gotham's back both literally and politically before threatening the entire city with a stolen nuclear device. Following two nearly perfect predecessors was always going to be a punishing assignment, and this installment carries a noticeably heavier, more sprawling plot, juggling a class warfare subplot, a masked villain whose muffled vocal delivery drew real criticism on release, and a runtime that strains under the weight of everything it is trying to resolve. What it delivers regardless is a truly operatic sense of scale. Gotham's occupation and eventual uprising, staged with a grim, practical grandeur that few blockbusters have matched since. And Anne Hathaway's take on Selina Kyle brings a sly, morally slippery energy the trilogy had been missing, stealing several scenes from her far more famous co-stars with little more than a raised eyebrow and a stolen string of pearls. Hardy's committed physical performance, built around sheer intimidating bulk rather than the Joker's anarchic charisma, gives Bane a remarkably different kind of menace than his predecessor. Its closing act, however divisive certain twists proved among longtime fans, brings real emotional closure to a character arc 8 years in the making. Marion Cotillard and Joseph Gordon-Levitt round out an already crowded ensemble with real conviction, and the film's practical destruction of an entire football stadium sequence, along with extensive on-location IMAX photography spanning 3 continents, gave the finale a tactile scale that digital compositing alone could rarely have sold quite as convincingly. Composer Hans Zimmer's chanting, percussive score for Bane became almost as iconic as the character's mask itself, reportedly built from a crowdsourced recording of thousands of fans chanting the same militaristic phrase and layered into the mix until it became genuinely unnerving on a cinema's full sound system. Our pick for the most ambitious closing chapter on this list, a finale that occasionally buckles under its own scale but still lands its landing. Number 9. Batman Begins, 2005. Arriving at a moment when the superhero genre badly needed rescuing from its own campiest instincts, this origin story rebuilt Bruce Wayne from the ground up, tracing his journey from a traumatized orphan through a League of Shadows training montage in the Himalayas, and back to a Gotham City rotted through with corruption and Cillian Murphy's fear gas-wielding Scarecrow. Its pacing is noticeably more deliberate than the 2 blockbusters that followed it, spending real time on psychology and origin mechanics before ever putting the cape and cowl fully into action. A patient approach some viewers coming to the trilogy backwards find slower than expected. What that patience buys is a sincerely grounded emotional foundation no prior Batman film had bothered building. Christian Bale's committed physical and vocal transformation, and Michael Caine's warm, paternal Alfred giving the whole enterprise a beating heart beneath the gadgetry. Its practical stunt work, real cars flipping through real Chicago streets rather than digital approximations, set a template for grounded blockbuster action that the entire genre would spend the next decade trying to imitate. It single-handedly proved that a comic book adaptation could be treated with the same formal seriousness as any prestige drama, reshaping studio expectations for the genre almost overnight. Liam Neeson's mentor-turned-antagonist and Ken Watanabe's brief but memorable early appearance give the film's philosophical debates about fear and justice real dramatic weight rather than mere table setting, and its decision to shoot large stretches on actual Chicago locations rather than an obviously constructed backlot gave Gotham a lived-in, recognizably urban texture the previous Batman franchise had entirely abandoned. Its modest but steady box office performance on release only grew in stature once its sequel arrived, a rare case of a franchise's foundational entry being retroactively elevated by the quality of what followed it rather than the reverse. Our pick for the most quietly influential entry on this list, the film that taught an entire industry how to take spandex seriously. Number 8. Dunkirk, 2017. Stripping dialogue down to near nothing across its entire runtime, this World War II survival epic interweaves three overlapping timelines: a week on the beach, a day at sea, and an hour in the air, to recreate the desperate evacuation of Allied soldiers trapped on the French coast in 1940. Its structural gambit, three different timescales converging toward the same climax, asks considerably more of a mainstream audience than a conventional war film ever would, and its almost total absence of individual character backstory leaves some viewers feeling held at an emotional distance from soldiers they never quite get to know personally. What that stripped-down approach achieves instead is pure, visceral, moment-to-moment survival tension. Hans Zimmer's relentless ticking clock score, fused with authentically harrowing practical aerial dogfight photography shot from real vintage Spitfires rather than green screen approximations. Harry Styles' supporting turn in his acting debut holds up far better than the tabloid skepticism around his casting predicted at the time. Its refusal to depict a single German soldier on screen, an unusual and deliberate choice, keeps the entire film locked inside the terror of the men being hunted rather than any conventional heroics on either side. It reshaped how a mainstream studio war epic could look and feel, trading dialogue-heavy exposition for pure sensory immersion. Cinematographer Hoyt van Hoytema shot the entire production on a mix of 65mm and IMAX film stock, cramming bulky IMAX cameras into cockpits and onto small boats in ways that had rarely, if ever, been attempted before, and the production's use of real Dunkirk beaches and actual restored vintage vessels, some of which had themselves taken part in the historical evacuation decades earlier, gave the whole film an unusual living connection to the event it was depicting. Its tight 90-minute-plus runtime remains the leanest in the director's entire filmography, a deliberate compression that leaves almost no room for a single wasted shot across its interlocking timelines. Our pick for the most formally daring entry on this list, a war film that trusts silence and structure over speeches to make you feel the fear. Number 7. Memento, 2000. Told in a now legendary reverse chronological structure, intercut with black and white forward-moving scenes, this breakout thriller follows Guy Pearce's Leonard, a man unable to form new memories after a violent attack, as he hunts his wife's killer using a system of Polaroids, handwritten notes, and tattoos inked directly onto his own body to compensate for a mind that resets every few minutes. Its structural gimmick, watching each new scene before immediately seeing the scene that caused it, demands total audience concentration and famously confuses first-time viewers who mistake disorientation for a flaw rather than the entire deliberate point of the exercise. What that structure achieves is one of the most unmistakably ingenious formal experiments in modern American cinema, forcing you to experience Leonard's own fractured, unreliable relationship with the truth, rather than simply being told about it from a comfortable narrative distance. Pierce's tightly controlled, quietly desperate performance sells a character whose entire moral compass has been reduced to whatever fragment of evidence is currently in front of him, while Carrie-Anne Moss brings real ambiguity to a role that keeps shifting depending on which timeline you are watching. Its independent budget and unconventional distribution deal made it a word-of-mouth sensation, launching Nolan directly from cult curiosity to a director every studio in town suddenly wanted to meet. The screenplay itself was adapted from a short story written by Nolan's own brother Jonathan, the two siblings reportedly trading ideas about memory and identity during long car rides years before either had a studio deal, a collaboration that would continue to shape several of the director's later scripts. Its ending, ambiguous enough to spark debate about how much of Leonard's account can even be trusted, remains one of the most dissected final scenes of the entire decade, still generating fresh video essays and forum arguments a quarter-century after release. Our pick for the most structurally audacious entry on this list, a puzzle box thriller that turns its own gimmick into a devastating statement about grief and self-deception. Number 6, The Prestige, 2006. Set among the smoky, gaslit theaters of Victorian London, this obsessive rivalry drama follows two competing stage magicians, Hugh Jackman's showman and Christian Bale's technician, whose escalating one-upmanship over a single vanishing man illusion spirals into sabotage, imprisonment, and a convincingly startling science fiction twist involving Nikola Tesla's real-world experiments with electricity. Its structure nests flashback within stolen diary entries, a layered puzzle box approach that rewards a second viewing far more generously than a first. And its late twist, however carefully seeded throughout, still divides viewers between those who find it a devastating gut punch and those who feel faintly cheated by the science fiction left turn. What holds the whole intricate structure together is an undeniably vicious two-hander at its center: Jackman and Bale trading obsession, cruelty, and mutual destruction, with a ferocity neither actor has quite matched since, while David Bowie's brief magnetic turn as Tesla adds a distinctly strange, otherworldly texture to the film's back half. Its meticulous production design, recreating Victorian stage magic with real period detail rather than shortcuts, sells every trick the two rivals perform as something the audience is meant to actually try solving alongside them. It remains, among dedicated fans, one of the most quietly rewatchable entries in the entire filmography, precisely because its clues only fully click into place the second time through. Michael Caine rounds out the cast as the aging engineer who builds each illusion's mechanical secrets, giving the rivalry's escalating cruelty a weary moral conscience watching from the sidelines, and the production's insistence on real period stagecraft, working birds, water tanks, and mechanical traps built to actually function rather than merely photograph well, gives every trick performed on screen a tactile credibility rarely afforded to films about fictional magic. And Scarlett Johansson's ambiguous stage assistant, caught pulling loyalties in both directions, keeps the central rivalry from ever curdling into pure male ego on its own. Our pick for the most purely rewatchable entry on this list, a magic trick of a film that improves every single time you catch how it was done. Number 5, Oppenheimer, 2023. Shot in a mix of black and white and color IMAX photography to distinguish subjective and objective timelines, this biographical epic follows Cillian Murphy's tormented physicist from his early academic ambitions, through his leadership of the Manhattan Project, and into the political persecution that followed his own creation's use on two Japanese cities. Its 3-hour runtime is dense with courtroom testimony, physics exposition, and overlapping timeframes that ask real sustained attention from an audience more accustomed to biopics moving in a single straight line, and its unflinching refusal to depict the bombings themselves directly struck some viewers as a curious, deliberate absence at the film's moral center. What it achieves instead is one of the most purely internal character studies Nolan has ever attempted. Murphy's haunted, increasingly hollowed-out performance, carrying the film's entire moral weight through his eyes alone, while Robert Downey Jr.'s quietly vindictive supporting turn earned him his first Academy Award after decades of blockbuster stardom, a late career reinvention few would have predicted after so many years spent inside a single franchise's armor. Its recreation of the Trinity test, achieved through practical in-camera effects rather than digital simulation, remains one of the single most awe-inspiring and truly terrifying sequences in Nolan's entire filmography. It swept the following year's Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, cementing a critical and commercial legitimacy the director had been circling for 2 decades. Emily Blunt's performance as Kitty Oppenheimer brings real, brittle fury to a wife watching her husband's conscience and reputation both unravel in public. And Matt Damon's blunt, no-nonsense turn as General Groves provides the film's rare moments of dry, procedural humor amid its mounting dread. Its $300+ million worldwide box office, extraordinary for a 3-hour drama built almost entirely around dialogue and courtroom testimony, proved serious adult filmmaking could still be a theatrical event, and its release strategy, deliberately counter-programmed against a lighter summer blockbuster the same weekend, sparked an entire cultural moment built around the pairing of the two wildly different films. Our pick for the most decorated entry on this list, a 3-hour character study that turns the birth of the atomic age into an unbearably intimate tragedy. Number 4. The Odyssey 2026. Barely 2 weeks old at the time of this recording, this adaptation of Homer's foundational epic follows Matt Damon's Odysseus on his 10-year, monster-strewn voyage home from the Trojan War, while Anne Hathaway's Penelope and Tom Holland's Telemachus hold together a household under siege by suitors back in Ithaca, all shot entirely on newly engineered 70mm IMAX film stock, never before used for a full theatrical production. Its sheer ensemble scale, an unusually stacked supporting cast including Zendaya, Charlize Theron, Lupita Nyong'o, Robert Pattinson, Mia Goth, Benny Safdie, John Bernthal, and John Leguizamo, invites the obvious concern that a nearly 3-hour runtime simply cannot serve every character it introduces with equal depth. And given its release only weeks before this list was written, it has not yet had the decades other entries here have had to settle into cultural legacy. What it has already achieved is remarkable regardless of that short runway, a critic's score and an audience score that both broke Nolan's own personal records on release, and an opening weekend gross that outpaced even Oppenheimer's, all while being the very first film shot entirely on IMAX's new camera system, rather than a mix of formats. Damon anchors an remarkably grueling physical journey with the same haunted, weathered gravity that made his best dramatic work land, and the production's insistence on real oceans, real practical creature work, and real coastlines over digital substitution gives the whole voyage a tactile, salt-sprayed authenticity rarely seen at this budget. We are placing a 2-week-old film this high purely on the strength of what is already on screen, fully aware that whether it earns the deeper audience love of the films still above it is a verdict only time, not an opening weekend, can actually deliver. Running 2 hours and 52 minutes, it is already the longest single film Nolan has ever released theatrically, and its status as the very first production shot entirely on newly engineered IMAX film cameras, rather than a patchwork of digital and analog formats, has already made it a genuine reference point for how large format cinematography might evolve over the coming decade. Its opening 10 days alone pushed worldwide grosses past $600 million, a pace few dramas at any budget have ever managed to sustain. And early audience surveys already point to unusually strong repeat viewership from crowds returning specifically to experience the 70mm format a second time. Our pick for the boldest placement on this entire list, a technical and critical triumph that has already earned its spot squarely on craft alone, with the rest of its legacy still very much unwritten and entirely up to you. Number 3. Interstellar, 2014. A former test pilot turned farmer, played by Matthew McConaughey, leaves his young daughter behind to pilot a desperate mission through a wormhole near Saturn in search of a habitable planet. As a dust-choked, dying Earth runs out of time, and relativistic time dilation means his hours on one alien ocean world cost his daughter decades back home. Its back half leans into an emotionally maximalist, some would say sentimental, vision of love as a sincerely measurable force capable of transcending dimensions. A swing some hard science fiction purists still resist even as the film's black hole visualization, developed with a real theoretical physicist, proved scientifically groundbreaking enough to generate actual academic papers. What it achieves regardless is one of the most purely devastating single scenes in Nolan's entire career. McConaughey watching decades of accumulated video messages from the daughter he left behind arrive all at once is a gut punch that transcends any argument about the science surrounding it. Anne Hathaway and a then unknown to most Jessica Chastain anchor the mission's emotional stakes on both ends of that wormhole, while Hans Zimmer's cathedral organ score gives the whole Odyssey a authentically spiritual, almost religious scale. Its practical, in-camera approach to the Endurance spacecraft and its rotating docking sequence remains a convincing engineering achievement. Most modern space epics still simply fake digitally. We rank it above Inception here, specifically for the emotional gut punch it lands, that no puzzle box structure, however clever, has ever quite matched. Matthew McConaughey delivers what many still consider the finest performance of his career. A weathered, guilt-racked father whose love for his daughter functions as the film's actual guiding physics. And Michael Caine's dying professor gives the mission's early scenes a quiet, mournful urgency that pays off devastatingly by the third act. Its 5-story tall physical set, built to simulate the Endurance spacecraft's rotation, remains one of the largest single practical builds of Nolan's career, and the decision to shoot on actual 70mm IMAX film rather than digital cameras gave the cornfield vistas of its opening act an almost tactile, painterly scale rarely seen in modern science fiction. Our pick for the most emotionally overwhelming entry on this list, hard science and pure, unguarded sentiment fused together into something that still quietly wrecks audiences well over a decade after it first opened in theaters. Number 2. Inception, 2010. Leonardo DiCaprio's corporate thief specializes in stealing secrets from inside people's dreams, only to be offered one final, impossible job, planting an idea rather than stealing one, that sends his assembled crew diving through nested dream-within-a-dream layers, where time moves differently at every level, and the architecture of the mind itself can be folded like a sheet of paper. Its dense, exposition-heavy middle stretch, establishing rules for 4 or 5 simultaneous nested dream levels, asks real patience from viewers before the mechanics click. And its now iconic, ambiguous final shot of a spinning top has generated 15 years of continuous, unmistakably unresolved online debate about whether the ending is real. What that density buys is one of the most purely inventive high-concept blockbusters ever greenlit by a major studio. A hallway fight sequence rotating in camera around a real rotating practical set remains one of cinema's great pieces of pure physical craft, entirely unassisted by digital trickery. DiCaprio anchors the increasingly abstract dream logic with real, grounded grief over a dead wife haunting every level he descends into, while Tom Hardy and Joseph Gordon-Levitt bring sly, quotable charisma to a crew that could easily have felt like pure exposition delivery machines in less capable hands. Its massive commercial success, an original, non-franchise concept grossing over $800 million worldwide, proved a studio could still bet nine figures on a strange, unproven idea and win enormous audiences over. Ellen Page, in an early breakout role, gives the film's most exposition-heavy dialogue and urgency it might otherwise have lacked. And the production's decision to actually build and rotate a full-scale hotel corridor set, rather than rely on a spinning camera rig alone, remains one of the most celebrated practical solutions to an impossible visual problem in modern blockbuster history. Its influence on a full decade of subsequent high-concept science fiction remains difficult to overstate, spawning countless imitators chasing the same layered reality premise without ever quite matching the emotional anchor buried beneath its puzzle box mechanics. Our pick for the most purely inventive entry on this list, proof that a blockbuster can ask its audience to actively think and still sell out every single showing. Number 1. The Dark Knight, 2008. Our pick for the finest film Christopher Nolan has ever made. This trilogy centerpiece pits Christian Bale's increasingly weary Batman against Heath Ledger's anarchic, unforgettable Joker, an agent of pure chaos with no coherent motive beyond watching Gotham's fragile social order tear itself apart from within. While Aaron Eckhart's district attorney, Harvey Dent, completes one of cinema's most devastating fall-from-grace arcs. Some of its plotting, particularly the sheer number of simultaneous crises crammed into its climactic act, asks a lot of narrative real estate to resolve cleanly, and a small number of its digital effects have understandably aged less gracefully than the practical stunt work surrounding them. What secures its place at the very top of this list is a performance that redefined what a comic book villain could be. Ledger's Joker remains undeniably unsettling nearly 2 decades later, an improvisational, physically unpredictable force that earned him a posthumous Academy Award and reset audience expectations for the entire genre overnight. Nolan and cinematographer Wally Pfister shot key sequences on earnest IMAX film, then a radical choice for a studio blockbuster, giving Gotham's crumbling order a scale and clarity that still holds up against films made with vastly larger effects budgets today. Its willingness to end on a distinctly bleak, morally compromised note, a hero forced into hiding for a lie he did not tell, gave the superhero genre a permission structure. For real tragedy it had never previously been granted. It reshaped the entire industry's relationship with comic book adaptations almost overnight, and every prestige genre film that followed owes it a direct debt. Ledger's death only months before the film's release cast a genuinely somber shadow over its premiere and awards run, transforming what was already a towering performance into something the industry could not help but view through grief as well as admiration. And Gary Oldman's world-weary Commissioner Gordon quietly anchors the film's moral center, while its 2 more famous leads chase each other through Gotham's underworld. Its box office, crossing $1 billion worldwide at a time when few films outside animated blockbusters had ever managed that feat, proved audiences would show up in overwhelming numbers for a story this bleak. And its shadow still stretches over every comic book adaptation that has tried, and largely failed, to match its particular fusion of spectacle and tragedy in the years since. Our pick for the definitive entry on this entire list, the single film that proved once and for all a summer blockbuster could still function as a wholehearted, unflinching tragedy without losing a single ticket buyer along the way. So there it is, 13 films spanning nearly 3 decades, from a black and white con artist shuffling his own memory to a Greek king rowing his way home across an ocean of grief and monsters. What ties every one of these films together, whatever the genre, the decade, or the budget, is a director who has never once treated spectacle and intelligence as opposites, and who keeps proving, film after film, that audiences will meet ambition halfway if you simply respect them enough to ask them to. These were our picks. Now tell us how wrong we are for putting a film that just opened in theaters above a Best Picture winner. Tell us where you personally would have slotted Tenet instead. And if any of these 13 are still unwatched, you have the best homework assignment of your entire life waiting patiently for you. This has been Movie Blanket Club.